There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. You know it, even if you have never named it. It comes when your room is full, your calendar is full, your phone is full, your mind is full, and yet something in you keeps whispering, not enough. So you add more goals, more purchases, more noise, more distractions dressed up as rewards. And for a moment, it feels like movement. It feels like life is expanding. But then the house gets quieter at night, and in that quiet, a terrifying thought begins to rise. Maybe you are not building a life at all. Maybe you are just stacking things around an emptiness you have refused to face. Imagine this. It is late. The lights are off except for the pale glow of your screen. You have spent the whole day answering messages, comparing yourself to strangers, chasing tasks that multiplied faster than you could finish them. You tell yourself you are being productive, ambitious, alive. But when you finally put the phone down, your chest feels heavy. Not because you did too little, because somewhere deep down, you know you gave yourself to too much that did not matter. And that is the quiet crisis of modern life. Not hunger, not lack, excess. The kind that fills your hands and hollows your soul. The strangest thing about excess is that it rarely enters your life as a villain. It arrives as a promise. It tells you that one more achievement will make you feel secure. One more luxury will prove you are progressing. One more relationship, one more opportunity, one more yes. One more scroll, one more purchase, one more late night, one more plan. Then you will finally feel complete. But excess never says, I am here to drain you. It says, I am here to help. That is why so many people surrender to it without resistance. They do not feel trapped at first. They feel chosen. You may have felt that yourself. The excitement of wanting more is intoxicating because it saves you from asking harder questions. What am I actually living for? What is essential? What would remain if I stopped trying to impress the world? These questions are dangerous because they can strip away the identity you built from accumulation. And so, to avoid them, many people stay busy. They decorate their confusion. They turn restlessness into lifestyle. But purpose asks for something far more difficult than ambition. It asks for honesty. It asks you to look at your life without flattering yourself, to admit that not everything you are chasing deserves to be caught. That is where the real tension begins. Not between you and the world, but between you and the version of yourself that still believes more is the same as meaning. There is an old Stoic truth hidden beneath all of this. A person does not become free by possessing more. A person becomes free by needing less from what does not matter. That sounds simple. It is not. Because when you choose purpose over excess, you are not merely changing habits. You are entering a private war, a war against impulse, against vanity, against fear disguised as desire, against the part of you that wants comfort without clarity, stimulation without responsibility, abundance without discipline. And make no mistake, excess is seductive precisely because purpose can feel lonely at first. Purpose is not loud. It does not flatter your ego. It does not give instant relief. Often it asks you to walk away from what looks impressive in order to protect what is true. It asks you to become smaller in the eyes of others so you can become steadier in your own. This is the story at the heart of your life, whether you admit it or not. Not whether you can get more, but whether you can live without being ruled by more. Not whether you can fill every empty corner, but whether you can let emptiness teach you what belongs there. Because the truth is harsh and beautiful at the same time. If you do not choose your purpose, excess will choose your life for you. You're not born craving excess. You learn it. You learn it when you notice that people admire visible success more than invisible peace. You learn it when being busy makes you feel important. You learn it when silence becomes uncomfortable and consumption becomes your easiest escape. Maybe it started early. Maybe you discovered that achievement earned love, that looking strong kept people from seeing your fear, that owning the right things gave you temporary permission to believe you mattered. So you adapted. You became efficient at collecting symbols, not always money or status, sometimes subtler things, being needed, being praised, being everywhere, knowing everything, responding to everyone, always staying in motion so no one, not even you, could accuse you of wasting your life. But beneath all of it was the same hunger. Tell me I am enough. Excess is often just insecurity wearing expensive clothes, and the cruel part is that the world rewards it. It calls your overextension dedication. It calls your inability to rest ambition. It calls your fragmented attention connectivity. It even calls your self-abandonment discipline. So you keep going, unaware that what is being applauded outside you may be destroying order inside you. By the time you notice the cost, excess no longer feels like a choice. It feels like who you are. Think about the moments when you feel most compelled to reach for more. It is usually not when you are peaceful. It is when you are uneasy. After rejection, you want validation. After failure, you want proof. After loneliness, you want stimulation. After boredom, you want intensity. After uncertainty, you want control. Excess feeds on emotional vulnerability because it offers immediate anesthesia. It gives you something to do with your hands, so you do not have to sit with your heart. That is why a person can stand in a beautiful home and still feel poor. Why someone can be admired and still feel unseen. Why a calendar full of appointments can hide a life empty of direction. Excess does not solve inner disorder. It merely keeps you too occupied to examine it. There is a scene you may recognize. You wake up already behind. Before your feet touch the floor, you reach for your phone. In seconds, your mind belongs to other people's priorities, messages, news, comparisons, deadlines, images of lives edited to look effortless. And before your day has even begun, you feel deficient. So you rush, you consume, you react. You promise yourself you will slow down later, but later never arrives for the person who worships more. A Stoic would say this plainly: what governs your attention governs your life, and excess survives by stealing attention from purpose, one small surrender at a time. You can see this most clearly in the way modern life teaches you to confuse options with freedom. You're told that the more choices you have, the more alive you are, more content to watch, more products to buy, more paths to take, more people to become, more identities to try on. But after a certain point, abundance stops feeling like privilege and starts feeling like pressure. Every open door becomes another source of anxiety. Every possibility becomes another accusation. Why aren't you doing more with your life? So instead of living, you begin curating. You manage impressions. You optimize surfaces. You collect experiences not because they deepen you, but because they make you feel temporarily less ordinary. And quietly, a terrible fear grows inside you. The fear that if you stop moving, if you stop adding, if you stop proving, there may be nothing solid underneath. But that fear is exactly where your freedom begins. Because purpose is not found by expanding endlessly. It is found by subtracting bravely, by asking not, what else can I fit into my life? But what can I remove so my life can speak clearly? It is found when you realize that excess is not only what clutters your house, it is what clutters your identity. The roles, desires, obligations, and illusions you keep carrying long after they have stopped serving your soul. And once you begin to see that, you cannot unsee it. The noise starts sounding like noise. The rush starts feeling cheap. The life you have been calling full begins to reveal itself as crowded. There is usually a moment, not dramatic enough for a movie, but decisive enough to divide a life. Maybe it happens in a parking lot after a long day, when you sit in your car and stare at nothing because you do not have the strength to go inside. Maybe it happens during a celebration you worked for, when everyone around you is smiling, and yet you feel strangely absent, as if your body arrived, but your soul did not. Maybe it happens when someone you love is speaking, and you realize you have become so mentally scattered that you can no longer offer the simplest gift: full attention. These moments hurt because they expose a truth you were trying not to see. You are not tired because life is meaningful. You are tired because too much of your energy is leaking into things that do not deserve it. The problem is not effort. The problem is misdirected effort, not commitment, but commitment without center. Imagine a man standing in a room full of things he once wanted: the watch he saved for, the apartment he dreamed about, the clothes, the devices, the polished image. Years ago, he believed these would mark his arrival, but tonight he looks around and feels none of the triumph he expected. He feels like a guest inside a life built for display. He has acquired proof of success, but not an answer to the older question haunting him. What is all of this for? That is the wound excess can never heal, because excess can decorate your life. Only purpose can justify it. The Stoics understood something that people still resist. Suffering is not always caused by deprivation. Often it is caused by attachment to what you never needed in the first place. That sounds severe until you test it against your own experience. How much of your anxiety comes from protecting an image? How much of your fatigue comes from commitments made out of fear? How much of your distraction comes from appetites you never trained? You say life is complicated, but part of what you call complication is simply accumulation. Too many desires, too many dependencies, too many opinions allowed into the sacred interior of your mind. Marcus Aurelius, despite ruling an empire, kept returning in his private reflections to one central challenge: not how to dominate the world, but how not to be dominated by it. That is the real battlefield. Not outside, but within. Not against scarcity, but against inner servitude. A person can command armies and still be a slave to approval. A person can own palaces and still be impoverished by craving. And you do not need an empire to understand this. You only need to be honest enough to see where your peace is being sold, where your energy is being traded, where your life is being scattered into 1,000 fragments because you never stopped to decide what deserved your devotion. Purpose begins there, with the courage to admit that some of what you are carrying is not your destiny. It is just your excess. But here is what makes this realization painful. Once you see that more is not saving you, you lose the comfort of pretending. You can no longer say, "I'm just busy," when you know you are avoiding yourself. You can no longer say, "This is success," when success has left you spiritually starved. You can no longer say, "I have no choice," when in truth you have simply postponed the discipline of choosing. And discipline is frightening because it closes doors. It asks you to let go not only of certain pleasures, but of certain versions of yourself. The version that wants to be admired by everyone. The version that wants to say yes to everything. The version that confuses being desired with being valuable. The version that feels important only when overwhelmed. To choose purpose over excess is to disappoint these versions of yourself. That is why so many people delay it. They wait for collapse, heartbreak, illness, betrayal, burnout, some undeniable event that forces simplification upon them. But wisdom does not wait to be broken before it changes direction. You do not need to lose everything to see clearly. Sometimes you only need one honest night. One quiet moment in which you stop defending your chaos and admit what it has cost you. When that moment comes, do not run from it. It may be the first true conversation you have had with your life in years. And if you listen carefully, it will say the same thing purpose has been whispering to you all along. Less, but truer. Purpose is often misunderstood because people expect it to arrive as a grand revelation. They imagine a lightning strike, a calling so obvious it erases all confusion. But for most people, purpose enters more quietly than that. It appears in the moment you begin to distinguish between what is urgent and what is essential. It appears when you stop asking, "What will impress them?" and start asking, "What can I stand behind when no one is watching?" It appears when your life becomes less about constant expansion and more about rightful alignment. Consider a woman who has built a respectable life. Good job, constant messages, invitations, responsibilities. She looks capable from the outside, and she is. But every evening, she feels strangely dispersed, as if pieces of her have been handed out all day and none returned. One morning, without drama, she declines something she would normally accept. Then another. She stops attending what drains her, stops buying what flatters her insecurity, stops answering every demand as if it were holy. And at first, the silence that follows is unsettling. She worries she is falling behind, becoming less relevant, less visible. But slowly, another feeling begins to replace the panic. Relief, then clarity, then strength. Because purpose does not always make your life bigger. Sometimes it makes it cleaner, and in that cleanliness, you begin to hear your own mind again. This is where the Stoic path becomes practical, almost painfully practical. Purpose is not a slogan. It is what decides your schedule. It is what disciplines your appetite. It is what teaches your mouth to say no before your life drowns in yes. It is what tells you that being invited does not mean you must attend, that being capable does not mean you must carry everything, that wanting something does not mean you should obey that want. A purposeful life may still be demanding, but its demands are ordered. That is the difference. It has a center. When you wake up in the morning, you are not merely reacting to the nearest stimulus. You are returning to a chosen direction. Even your sacrifices make sense because they are in service of something you have consciously named. You see this in ordinary things. In the parent who comes home tired but chooses presence over distraction. In the worker who refuses promotion at the cost of their integrity. In the artist who creates slowly rather than chasing trends. In the friend who listens fully instead of performing attentiveness while their mind wanders elsewhere. These moments do not look glamorous, yet they reveal a rare power, the power to live from inner command rather than outer pressure. And that, quietly, is what excess can never offer you. Excess makes life louder. Purpose makes it coherent. Still, coherence has a price. When you begin to live purposefully, you will disappoint people who benefited from your confusion. Some will call you distant when you are simply becoming discerning. Some will call you unambitious when you stop sacrificing your life to vanity. Some will accuse you of changing, and they will be right. Because to choose purpose over excess is to change in a way the world cannot always celebrate. It is also to confront boredom, at least for a while. Excess is stimulating. Purpose is often repetitive. You return to the same values, the same disciplines, the same commitments. You wake, you choose, you refuse, you endure, you return again. This is not exciting in the shallow sense, but it is how character is forged, not in dramatic declarations, but in repeated fidelity. And eventually, something remarkable happens. The things that once looked restrictive begin to feel liberating. Simplicity becomes spacious. Restraint becomes dignity. Fewer desires means fewer chains. You discover that peace is not the reward at the end of excess. Peace is what excess keeps interrupting. So when you hear the phrase, choose purpose over excess, do not imagine a life stripped of beauty. Imagine a life in which beauty is no longer buried under clutter, a life where your energy is no longer leaking into what is trivial, a life where what matters has enough room to breathe. That is not less living. That is finally living on purpose. The challenge, of course, is that no one chooses purpose once and is done forever. You choose it repeatedly, especially on the days when excess looks easier. You choose it when you are lonely and want to numb yourself with attention that costs you self-respect. You choose it when you are insecure and tempted to buy something, not because you need it, but because you want relief. You choose it when you are overwhelmed and want distraction instead of truth. You choose it when your ego is bruised and you want revenge, display, indulgence, or applause to help you forget your wound. These are not abstract battles. They happen in kitchens, cars, offices, bedrooms, in 10-second decisions, in private moments where no one would know if you betrayed your deeper values. And that is why Stoicism is not cold philosophy. It is intimate warfare. It is the practice of governing yourself when impulse would rather govern you. Picture yourself standing at the edge of an old habit. You know exactly where it leads. More noise, more regret, more fragmentation. Nothing about it is surprising anymore. Yet the familiarity still pulls at you. In that moment, purpose does not arrive as inspiration. It arrives as restraint, as a hand on your own shoulder, as a quiet refusal, not because you are above temptation, but because you are tired of giving your life away to what weakens you. That is what dignity often looks like, unseen choices that keep your soul from scattering. There is a reason so many people fear simplicity. Simplicity leaves them alone with themselves. When the excess is removed, the endless entertainment, the performative busyness, the compulsive desire to acquire, what remains is not always immediately peaceful. Sometimes what remains is grief, or unfinished questions, or the realization that you built your routine around avoiding your own interior life. And if you are not prepared for that, you may mistake simplicity for emptiness and run back to noise. Do not make that mistake. The emptiness you feel at first is often not the absence of meaning. It is the withdrawal from overstimulation. It is your mind relearning how to stand still. It is your soul detoxing from a life lived in reaction. Of course, it feels uncomfortable. A room echoes when you first clear it out. But that echo is not a problem. It is space. And space is where truth becomes audible. This is why a purposeful life requires patience. You may not feel immediately rewarded for your restraint. In fact, you may feel exposed, but stay there. Stay long enough to notice the subtler rewards, your thoughts becoming cleaner, your attention deepening, your desires losing their panic, your speech becoming more deliberate, your days beginning to resemble each other, not in dullness, but in moral consistency. That is how purpose remakes a person, not all at once, but by teaching them to endure the quiet where excess used to scream. Eventually, you begin to see that choosing purpose over excess is not only about what you remove, it is about what you become available for. When your mind is not crowded by comparison, you can actually notice your own life. When your schedule is not bloated with obligations born from fear, you can give your best energy to what deserves it. When your desires are not multiplying faster than your character can hold them, gratitude becomes possible again. You begin to enjoy what once went unseen. A conversation without distraction, a morning without urgency, work done with integrity, food eaten with awareness, solitude that no longer feels like punishment. These are not small things. They are the texture of a life reclaimed. And strangely, this is where strength returns, not the flashy strength of dominance or image, but the quieter strength of self-possession. You stop being so easily manipulated by trends, praise, envy, temptation. You no longer need every feeling to be acted upon, every desire to be satisfied, every opportunity to be seized. You become harder to control because you are less eager to consume what the world is constantly selling. The Stoics believed that freedom begins when appetite no longer sits on the throne. That truth has not aged. If anything, it has become more urgent. Because today, there are entire industries built around keeping you inwardly restless. A purposeful life is an act of resistance, a refusal to let your soul be monetized, distracted, inflated, and exhausted. And every day you return to that refusal, you become a little more whole. At some point, if you keep choosing purpose, a subtle transformation occurs. The things that used to tempt you lose some of their glamour. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. You begin to see excess more clearly now. You recognize how often it borrows the language of freedom while delivering dependence. How often it promises expansion while producing exhaustion. How often it makes a person impressive from a distance and miserable up close. And so your standards change. You become less interested in what merely dazzles, more interested in what endures, less seduced by speed, more drawn to steadiness, less concerned with being seen, more committed to seeing clearly. You no longer want a life that looks rich but feels shallow. You want a life that may appear simpler from the outside, yet is internally unshakable. This does not mean you reject beauty, comfort, or success. Stoicism was never a religion of ugliness. It was a discipline of rightful proportion. The question is not whether you may enjoy good things. The question is whether good things have quietly become your master, whether you can hold them without clinging, lose them without collapse, and enjoy them without building your identity upon them. That is the real victory. Not owning nothing, but being owned by nothing. If you listen carefully, your life has probably been teaching you this lesson for years. Every burnout was a warning. Every moment of inner emptiness after outer achievement was a warning. Every purchase that thrilled you for an hour and then disappeared into the background of your life was a warning. Every relationship you neglected while chasing something shinier was a warning. Every restless night after a day full of productive motion was a warning. The warnings were not cruel. They were invitations. Invitations to ask a more mature question. Not, how can I have more? But what is worth giving my life to? That is the question excess keeps you too distracted to ask. And once you ask it seriously, the architecture of your life begins to change. Your habits change because your values become visible. Your speech changes because you stop trying to impress your way into significance. Your priorities change because you finally understand that time is not a resource to be spent recklessly. It is a portion of your life, and every trivial thing you surrender it to is a piece of yourself you will never get back. So you become protective, not in fear, but in wisdom. Protective of your mornings, your attention, your convictions, your energy, your conscience. Protective of the people and responsibilities that actually matter. Protective of the inner order, without which no outer success can satisfy you. This is what purpose does. It gathers you back from the places where excess left you divided. And now you arrive at the deepest truth of all. The opposite of excess is not deprivation. It is meaning. A life governed by purpose is not smaller. It is sharper. It is not empty. It is intentional. It may contain fewer distractions, but it contains more presence. Fewer performances, but more honesty. Fewer cravings, but more gratitude. Fewer possessions of the soul by trivial things, but more devotion to what is worthy. So when the world tells you to want more, pause. When your fear tells you to fill the silence with stimulation, pause. When your ego tells you to keep collecting proof that you matter, pause. And ask the question that cuts through all illusion. Will this deepen my life, or only decorate it? That one question can save you years. It can save your peace. It can save the parts of you that are still waiting to live in alignment. Because in the end, your life will not be measured by how much you manage to gather around yourself. It will be measured by whether what you gathered had anything to do with who you were becoming. So choose carefully. Choose slowly if you must, but choose clearly. Choose what strengthens your character over what flatters your appetite. Choose what remains when fashion, noise, praise, and novelty pass away. Choose the difficult clarity of purpose over the glittering confusion of excess. For the person who needs everything will never have enough, but the person who knows what matters can walk through abundance untouched. And now, one final question for you. When the noise falls away and you are left alone with your life, will what remains be enough to call it meaningful?